12 years after an entire family vanished on Halloween night, children playing in the woods made a discovery that still haunts investigators today. The costumes were perfectly preserved, still carrying the scent of their home. I'm a private investigator who spent the last decade reopening cold cases that law enforcement abandoned. What I found about the Rocha family disappearance will make you question everything you think you know about that Halloween night in 1995. Before we dive into this mystery, hit that subscribe button and the bell icon. Trust me, you'll want to follow this investigation to the very end. Now, let me tell you what really happened to the Rochas. I've investigated hundreds of missing person cases across 3 decades of police work and private investigation. But the Rocha family disappearance still keeps me awake at night, haunting my dreams with questions that seem to multiply rather than diminish with time. It was October 31st, 1995, and I remember that Halloween distinctly because I was working patrol in Millbrook County when the first call came in at exactly 10:03 p.m. from a panicked neighbor whose voice trembled with genuine fear. The autumn air was crisp that evening, with temperatures dropping to 42 degrees, according to weather records I later reviewed obsessively, and leaves crunching underfoot as concerned neighbors gathered on sidewalks, whispering about the dark house that should have been blazing with Halloween spirit and welcoming children with arms full of candy. Every single house on Maple Street was decorated with traditional jack-o'-lanterns and fake cobwebs, but the Rocha house had stood out dramatically all month because Maria had gone completely overboard that year, transforming their modest 2-story colonial into what neighbors called a Halloween wonderland that drew visitors from across the county. Orange lights wrapped around every tree in their meticulously maintained front yard. Life-size skeletons danced from the porch ceiling on nearly invisible fishing line that created an illusion of supernatural movement. And a fog machine she'd borrowed from the high school drama department created an eerie atmosphere that delighted every trick-or-treater who approached their front door with wide eyes and nervous giggles. The display had become so popular and elaborate that families drove from other neighborhoods just to experience it, creating minor traffic jams on their normally quiet residential street that the city council had actually discussed regulating. But what made the Rocha family special wasn't just their Halloween enthusiasm, it was the genuine warmth they brought to every interaction. The way they remembered every neighbor's name and asked about their families with sincere interest that went beyond polite small talk. David Rocha was a 34-year-old certified public accountant who worked at Morrison & Associates downtown, the kind of methodical, reliable man who wore pressed shirts even on lazy weekends and kept his lawn perfectly manicured using a ruler to ensure the grass stayed at exactly 2 inches height, a quirk that amused his neighbors but also impressed them with his attention to detail. His colleagues described him as quietly brilliant with numbers, someone who could spot discrepancies in financial records that others missed, though he was humble about his abilities and always deflected credit to his team. He had this habit of bringing homemade cookies to work every Friday, recipes that Maria had taught him during their early marriage when money was tight and they learned to find joy in simple domestic rituals. Maria, his wife of 8 years, taught 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary and was absolutely beloved by parents and children alike, known for staying after school until 6 p.m. to help struggling students master difficult concepts and organizing elaborate classroom parties that other teachers tried unsuccessfully to imitate. She had this infectious laugh that could be heard echoing down the school hallways, and her former students still sent her Christmas cards years after graduation. Many including drawings of lessons she'd taught them or memories of special classroom moments she'd created. Principal Margaret Walsh later told me during our investigation that Maria was the kind of teacher who changed children's lives, who saw potential in every student and had an almost magical ability to reach kids that other educators had given up on. Their twins, Sophia and Miguel, had just turned 6 in September and were those rare siblings who were genuinely inseparable, often finishing each other's sentences in that mysterious way that twins sometimes develop, and sharing the same recurring nightmares about monsters under their beds that required both parents to perform elaborate checking rituals every bedtime. That Halloween, Sophia had insisted on dressing as a fairy princess, complete with silver wings, that Maria had spent 3 weeks hand-sewing with hundreds of sequins that caught streetlight and made her look like she was glowing with otherworldly magic. When she moved, Miguel wore a vampire cape that he'd discovered at a downtown thrift store during a family shopping trip and refused to take off even during dinner, much to his father's patient amusement and his mother's gentle protests about proper table manners and getting food stains on his costume. The family had established a sacred Halloween tradition over the past 4 years, where they would trick-or-treat together as a complete unit, before David would station himself at their front door to hand out full-size candy bars and engage in elaborate conversations with costumed children, while Maria took the twins through the neighborhood's most elaborate and competitive Halloween displays, creating memories that were supposed to last a lifetime. David Rocha was a 34-year-old certified public accountant who worked at Morrison & Associates downtown, the kind of methodical man who wore pressed shirts even on weekends and kept his lawn perfectly manicured, using a ruler to ensure the grass stayed at exactly 2 inches height. His neighbors described him as friendly but reserved, someone who would wave from his driveway but rarely engaged in lengthy conversations over the fence. Maria, his wife of 8 years, taught 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary and was absolutely beloved by parents and children alike, known for staying after school to help struggling students and organizing elaborate classroom parties that other teachers tried to imitate. She had this infectious laugh that could be heard echoing down the school hallways, and her former students still sent her Christmas cards years after graduation. Their twins, Sophia and Miguel, had just turned 6 in September and were those rare siblings who were genuinely inseparable, often finishing each other's sentences and sharing the same recurring nightmares about monsters under their beds. That Halloween, Sophia had insisted on dressing as a fairy princess, complete with silver wings, that Maria had spent weeks hand-sewing with sequins that caught streetlight and made her look like she was glowing. Miguel wore a vampire cape that he'd discovered at a thrift store and refused to take off even during dinner, much to his father's amusement and his mother's gentle protests about proper table manners. The family had established a sacred Halloween tradition over the years where they would trick-or-treat together as a unit, before David would station himself at their front door to hand out full-size candy bars, while Maria took the kids through the neighborhood's most elaborate and competitive Halloween displays. What made this case so deeply unsettling from the very beginning was how absolutely normal and routine everything appeared until the precise moment they simply weren't there anymore, as if someone had hit a cosmic pause button on their lives and then carefully erased 4 people from existence without leaving behind any logical explanation. Mrs. Henderson from the house directly next door, a retired librarian with an obsessive attention to detail that would later prove invaluable to our investigation, told me during our first extensive interview that she had watched them leave around exactly 7:04 p.m., checking her antique kitchen clock because she was timing a casserole in the oven and didn't want to burn dinner again like she had the previous week. She remembered every detail with photographic clarity. Sophia's handmade wings, sparkling like captured starlight under the bright porch light, as she skipped down the front steps with the boundless energy and excitement that only 6-year-olds possess on Halloween night. Miguel was characteristically dragging his beloved cape behind him, leaving a distinct trail in the fallen leaves that Mrs. Henderson could see from her kitchen window, and Maria was gently adjusting David's hastily assembled ghost costume with the patient love of a wife who had long ago accepted her husband's complete lack of artistic ability. The costume was nothing more than a white sheet they'd grabbed from the linen closet, with uneven eye holes that Maria had cut while laughing about David's tendency to procrastinate on Halloween preparations until the very last minute. They were heading confidently toward prestigious Oakwood Drive, about 6 blocks away, through well-lit residential streets, where the wealthy families always handed out full-size candy bars and transformed their multi-acre properties into elaborate haunted attractions that drew children from across the entire county and sometimes required police traffic control. Mrs. Henderson had waved enthusiastically from her kitchen window, the same window where she'd watched their family activities for years, and Maria had waved back with her free hand while balancing Sophia's trick-or-treat bag, her detailed witch costume billowing dramatically in the evening breeze, like something from a classic horror film that would have been beautiful if we'd known it was the last time anyone would see her alive. What happened next, or more accurately, what didn't happen, created a timeline that investigators would analyze and reanalyze for years without finding any logical explanation. The Hendersons, who were meticulous people with rigid schedules, continued their evening routine of watching the news and preparing for bed, occasionally glancing out their windows to see the steady stream of costumed children walking past their house. At 8:15 p.m., Mrs. Henderson noticed that the Rocha's elaborate Halloween display was still running perfectly, fog machine creating its mystical atmosphere and orange lights twinkling invitingly, which seemed normal since they typically kept the decorations running until at least 10 p.m. to welcome late trick-or-treaters. At 8:45 p.m., she saw several groups of children approach the dark Rocha house and ring the doorbell repeatedly, but no one answered, which struck her as odd, since Maria never missed an opportunity to compliment children on their costumes and hand out generous portions of candy. By 9 p.m., she was beginning to feel concerned because she knew David should have returned by now to begin his traditional duty as candy distributor, while Maria continued touring the neighborhood with the twins. The first truly alarming sign came at exactly 9:32 p.m., when Mrs. Henderson noticed that the Rocha house was sitting in complete and total darkness, every single light extinguished, including the elaborate Halloween display that had been running continuously for weeks, which was unprecedented and immediately terrifying. No warm porch light welcoming late trick-or-treaters, no orange glow from the decorative lights, no fog machine creating its mystical atmosphere, and most importantly and disturbingly, absolutely no response to the disappointed children who kept ringing the bell and knocking hopefully on their front door. This was completely unthinkable, because Maria had never, not once in 8 years of living in that house, missed a single costumed child on Halloween night, often staying awake until nearly midnight to ensure every late trick-or-treater received not just candy, but one of her famous compliments about their creative costumes and her genuine interest in hearing about their evening adventures. The first ominous sign that something had gone terribly wrong came at exactly 9:32 p.m., when the Hendersons noticed the Rocha house was sitting in complete and total darkness, which was unprecedented and immediately alarming. No warm porch light welcoming late trick-or-treaters, no elaborate Halloween decorations illuminated and creating their usual magical atmosphere, and most importantly and disturbingly, absolutely no one answering the front door for the disappointed children who kept ringing the bell and knocking hopefully. This was completely unthinkable because Maria had never, not once in 8 years of living in that house, missed a single costumed child on Halloween night, often staying awake until nearly midnight to ensure every late trick-or-treater received a generous handful of candy and one of her famous compliments about their creative costumes. Mrs. Henderson felt compelled to investigate this deeply troubling situation, so she grabbed her wool coat and walked across the narrow strip of grass that separated their driveways, her footsteps echoing in the unusual silence that seemed to have settled over the entire neighborhood like a heavy blanket. What she discovered when she reached their front door made her blood run cold and her hands shake uncontrollably. The door was not just unlocked, but hanging slightly ajar, swaying gently in the autumn breeze with a soft creaking sound that she would hear in her nightmares for years afterward. This discovery immediately set off every alarm bell in her mind, because David was absolutely obsessive about home security, having installed 3 brand new deadbolts, a heavy chain lock, and even a door security bar, just that previous summer after reading a detailed newspaper article about a series of break-ins that had occurred in a neighborhood just 2 miles away. He was the type of man who checked every lock twice before going to bed, and had even installed motion sensor lights around their entire property perimeter. The house felt eerily quiet in a way that seemed to absorb sound rather than simply containing silence, creating an atmosphere that made Mrs. Henderson's skin crawl with inexplicable dread. Inside, she found half-eaten bowls of Maria's famous homemade chili still sitting on the kitchen table, the ceramic bowls still retaining traces of warmth and steam long since dissipated, spoons laying beside them as if the family had been interrupted mid-meal and simply walked away without a word of explanation. Miguel's kindergarten homework was spread carefully across the mahogany dining room table, a math worksheet with his name written in his careful, wobbling handwriting that showed he was still learning to control a pencil, the assignment half completed with number 2 pencil marks that would later be analyzed by forensics experts searching for any possible clue. The Halloween decorations throughout the house told their own disturbing story of interrupted preparation and abandoned celebration. Maria's witch costume accessories were laid out on their bedroom dresser with precise organization, including a silver bracelet she always wore and the small, compact mirror she used to check her makeup before leaving the house. Sophia's fairy princess tiara sat on her small vanity table, positioned perfectly as if she had planned to wear it as a final touch to her costume, but never got the chance. Miguel's plastic vampire teeth were in a glass of water by the bathroom sink, soaking as Maria had taught him to do to keep them clean and ready for next year's Halloween celebration that would never come. Most unnervingly, David's work clothes were hanging neatly in the bedroom closet, his tie draped over the chair exactly as he always left them when changing into casual clothes, suggesting that everything had been completely normal until the moment they disappeared. The house contained no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass or displaced objects, nothing that would indicate violence or forced entry. It was as if the family had simply evaporated while going about their normal evening routine, leaving behind a perfectly preserved snapshot of their interrupted lives that would haunt investigators for decades to come. I arrived at the scene around 10:17 p.m. in my patrol car, emergency lights casting red and blue shadows across the quiet residential street where curious neighbors had begun gathering on their front porches despite the late hour. And what I discovered inside that house has haunted my dreams and fundamentally shaped my investigative career for nearly 3 decades since that night. The house looked exactly like its occupants had simply vanished mid-evening while going about their normal Halloween routine, as if they had been suddenly teleported away by some unknown force that left no trace of its intervention. David's favorite coffee mug, a ceramic cup with "World's Okayest Dad" printed in faded letters that the twins had given him for Father's Day 3 years earlier, was still sitting on the kitchen counter with coffee that was somehow still faintly warm to the touch, steam rising from the black liquid he'd been drinking before they embarked on their annual trick-or-treating adventure. The coffee was still warm enough to suggest they'd left recently, but not so hot as to indicate they'd just stepped out moments before our arrival, creating a timeline that would later prove crucial to our investigation. Maria's leather purse sat in its usual designated spot on the polished hallway table, where she always left it when returning home. Wallet containing exactly $127 in cash, and all her credit cards still tucked safely inside, alongside her car keys, which immediately and completely ruled out any theory that this family had left voluntarily or been forced to flee in a hurry by some external threat. Most disturbing and inexplicable was the Halloween candy scattered across the hardwood floor near the front entrance, as if someone had dropped their trick-or-treat bags in sudden panic or been forced to abandon them while fleeing from some unknown threat that left no other evidence of its presence. Sophia's plastic jack-o'-lantern bucket was overturned and lying on its side near the umbrella stand. Dozens of mini chocolate bars, colorful lollipops, and fun-sized packages of M&Ms and Snickers rolling across the polished floor like tiny evidence markers of an interrupted evening that should have been filled with nothing but childhood joy and family memories. The candy was still scattered exactly as it had fallen, with no evidence that anyone had attempted to clean up or organize the mess, suggesting that whatever had happened occurred quickly and without warning. Some of the candy wrappers showed small tears and bite marks, indicating that the children had been eating their treats while walking, a normal behavior that made the scene even more unsettling because it suggested they had been enjoying a perfectly ordinary Halloween evening until the moment everything went wrong. What struck me most profoundly as I processed the crime scene was the complete absence of any logical explanation for their disappearance. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere in the house, no broken windows or damaged door frames, no scratches on the lock mechanisms that would suggest someone had picked them or used specialized tools to gain access. The house's security system, which David had installed just 6 months earlier, showed no record of being triggered or disabled, and all the entry points remained locked from the inside except for the front door that Mrs. Henderson had found ajar. The back door was still secured with its deadbolt and chain lock. All windows remained locked with their original hardware, showing no signs of tampering. And even the basement entrance through the bulkhead was secured exactly as David had left it after storing their lawn furniture for winter. It was as if the family had walked out their front door and simply ceased to exist, leaving behind a house that felt like a museum dedicated to interrupted lives and abandoned dreams. The investigation consumed the entire Millbrook Police Department for months. We interviewed every neighbor, every family they'd encountered while trick-or-treating, every teacher at Maria's school, and every client David had worked with in the past year. Security cameras were virtually non-existent in 1995, especially in residential neighborhoods, so we relied heavily on witness statements and physical evidence. The trail went cold almost immediately because after Mrs. Henderson saw them leave at 7 p.m., absolutely no one remembered seeing the family anywhere in the neighborhood. It was as if they'd walked out their front door and disappeared into the October night, leaving behind no trace except those scattered pieces of candy and a house that felt like a museum of interrupted lives. Theories emerged almost immediately from concerned neighbors, amateur detectives on early internet forums, and even professional investigators from other jurisdictions who had heard about our case, each more unsettling and far-fetched than the last, creating a complex web of speculation that often hindered more than helped our official investigation efforts. Some neighbors whispered conspiratorially in grocery store aisles and coffee shops about David having accumulated secret gambling debts to dangerous people connected to organized crime, though his meticulously organized financial records, which we analyzed line by line going back 5 years, showed nothing unusual beyond typical middle-class family expenses, a modest mortgage payment, and even a growing savings account that suggested responsible financial management rather than desperate gambling behavior. We investigated every casino within a 200-mile radius, showing David's photograph to dealers and security personnel, but no one recognized him as a regular customer or problem gambler. Other community members speculated about Maria having a secret extramarital affair, and the entire family fleeing to start a new life with her lover. But her teaching colleagues swore under oath that she was completely devoted to her family and rarely socialized outside mandatory school functions and PTA meetings, where she always brought David along, proudly. We traced her phone records, examined her personal correspondence, and even searched her classroom at the elementary school for any hidden communications. but found no evidence of any romantic relationship outside her marriage. Her principal, Margaret Walsh, told us that Maria often spoke lovingly about David and the twins, showing off family photographs and bragging about their accomplishments with the genuine pride of a devoted wife and mother. The most persistent and disturbing theory involved a bitter custody dispute with David's ex-girlfriend from his college years, a woman named Rebecca Torres, who had briefly dated David during their sophomore year at State University before he met Maria. Several anonymous tips suggested Rebecca had never gotten over the relationship and might have harbored resentment about David's successful family life. However, our investigation revealed that Rebecca lived in Sacramento, California, had been married to her own husband for 6 years, had 2 children of her own, and possessed rock-solid alibis for that entire week, including credit card receipts from restaurants and gas stations, time-stamped photographs from a family vacation to Disneyland, and multiple witness statements from relatives and co-workers who had interacted with her during the relevant time period. We even flew a detective to California to interview her in person, but she was genuinely shocked to learn about the disappearance and provided DNA samples voluntarily to eliminate any possible connection to the case. Federal agents from the FBI arrived 3 weeks into our investigation to explore the possibility of witness protection relocation, theorizing that David might have inadvertently discovered financial irregularities, money laundering, or other criminal activity at his accounting firm that could have put the entire family in mortal danger from organized crime figures. They spent days examining his client files, interviewing his co-workers and supervisors, and analyzing every financial document he had processed in the months leading up to the disappearance. However, his boss at Morrison & Associates, Gerald Morrison himself, insisted that David worked exclusively with small local businesses like family restaurants, auto repair shops and retail stores, providing basic bookkeeping and tax preparation services that would give him absolutely no access to information worthy of such drastic protective measures. The FBI agents eventually concluded that David's work was too routine and low-level to warrant witness protection, and no federal agencies had any record of the Rocha family being relocated for their safety. Perhaps the most elaborate theory came from Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychology professor at the nearby university who had followed the case closely and developed her own hypothesis about mass psychological breakdown. She suggested that the entire family might have experienced a rare form of collective psychosis triggered by stress, financial pressure, or underlying mental health issues that caused them to abandon their lives voluntarily and assume new identities somewhere far from Millbrook. We investigated this possibility by examining their medical records for any history of mental illness, interviewing their family physician who had known them for years, and even consulting with psychiatrists who specialized in dissociative disorders. However, all evidence pointed to a psychologically healthy family with strong relationships and no history of mental health problems or unusual stress that might trigger such an extreme response. The case was officially classified as cold in February 1998, filed away in a grey metal cabinet that accumulated dust and bureaucratic neglect, while new families moved in and out of the neighborhood, and Halloween gradually became a more subdued, cautious affair on Maple Street, with parents accompanying even teenage children and trick-or-treating ending much earlier than in previous years. The Rocha house sat completely empty for nearly 2 years, becoming a source of local legend and teenage dares, before David's elderly parents finally sold it to a young couple from Portland who had absolutely no knowledge of its tragic history and were simply attracted by the below-market price and the beautiful mature trees in the front yard. I left the police force in 2000 to establish my private investigation business, specializing in cold cases that departments had abandoned, but I kept complete copies of all the Rocha case files in a locked filing cabinet in my office unable to let go of the persistent feeling that we had missed something crucial, some vital clue that would unlock the entire mystery. Every October 31st without fail, I found myself driving slowly past their old address at 1247 Maple Street, windows down to smell the autumn air, and remember that night, wondering if this would finally be the year when some new evidence would emerge from the shadows of that long-ago Halloween evening when 4 people walked into darkness and never returned to the light. Then on a particularly dreary and rain-soaked afternoon in October 2007, exactly 12 years to the month after the disappearance, everything about this case changed in ways that challenged everything I thought I knew about the laws of nature, decomposition, and the logical progression of time itself. A group of enthusiastic children from the local Boy Scout Troop 247 were participating in their annual nature cleanup project deep in Millbrook Forest, approximately 8 miles northwest from where the Rocha family had lived and disappeared, following well-marked hiking trails that wound through dense sections of towering maple, oak, and pine trees that had stood sentinel in these woods for over a century. The forest was particularly popular with experienced hikers during peak fall foliage season, when the canopy exploded in brilliant reds, oranges, and golds. But it became largely deserted during late autumn, when the colorful leaves had fallen, and the muddy trails became treacherous and difficult to navigate without proper hiking equipment and experience reading natural landmarks. 11-year-old Tommy Chen, a quiet, observant kid who was always wandering off from the main group to examine interesting rocks or unusual plants with the focused curiosity that some children possess naturally, was methodically picking up aluminum cans and plastic bottles near a babbling creek that ran through a particularly dense section of the forest when his sharp eyes spotted something completely out of place, wedged between 2 massive fallen logs. The logs, each nearly 3 feet in diameter, had fallen years earlier during a severe thunderstorm and had created a natural shelter from harsh weather and curious wildlife, forming an almost cave-like hollow that was invisible unless someone approached from exactly the right angle. What Tommy discovered in that hidden space would reopen the case, challenge our understanding of natural decomposition, and haunt investigators for years to come. What Tommy Chen found in that forest clearing defied every natural law of decomposition, weather damage, and organic decay that I had learned during 20 years of investigative work and crime scene analysis, spanning hundreds of cases involving outdoor evidence recovery. 4 complete Halloween costumes, preserved in absolutely pristine condition as if they had been stored in a professional climate-controlled museum environment with humidity controls and UV protection, were arranged almost ceremonially in that natural hollow between the fallen logs, positioned with deliberate care and precision that clearly suggested intentional human intervention rather than random abandonment by animals or natural forces. The arrangement itself was deeply unsettling. The costumes were laid out as if invisible people were still wearing them, arms positioned naturally at their sides, fabric smoothed and organized with attention to detail that would have required considerable time and effort from whoever had placed them there. Sophia's fairy princess dress still sparkled brilliantly, with thousands of silver sequins and glitter that caught the filtered autumn sunlight penetrating the forest canopy, creating prismatic reflections that danced across the surrounding trees like captured magic. Every single sequin remained perfectly attached to the fabric, despite 12 years of potential exposure to rain, snow, ice, wind, and the activities of forest animals that should have damaged or displaced such delicate decorative elements. The handmade wings that Maria had spent weeks creating with patient love were completely intact, not a single wire bent or fabric panel torn, shimmering like captured moonlight in ways that seemed almost supernatural, given the harsh environment where they had been discovered. The dress itself showed no signs of fading, staining, or deterioration, despite being constructed from delicate materials that should have degraded significantly when exposed to the elements over more than a decade. Miguel's beloved vampire cape showed absolutely no signs of wear, fading, or weather damage of any kind. The rich red satin lining as vibrant and lustrous as the day Maria had carefully sewn on the black velvet collar with her vintage Singer sewing machine that had belonged to her grandmother. The cape's dramatic length, which had dragged behind Miguel as he walked and should have collected dirt, leaves, and stains during normal wear, remained spotlessly clean, without any indication that it had ever been worn outdoors or exposed to natural elements. Even more impossibly, the fabric retained the soft texture and rich color saturation of new material, as if it had been purchased the day before rather than worn by a child 12 years earlier during what became his final Halloween celebration. David's improvised ghost costume remained pristine white, without a single stain, tear, or discoloration mark. The simple bedsheet fabric appearing freshly laundered and pressed, despite having been discovered in a forest environment that should have subjected it to dirt, moisture, organic matter, and the natural processes of decay that affect all organic materials over time. Those characteristic crooked eye holes that Maria had cut with kitchen scissors in a moment of loving exasperation at her husband's procrastination were exactly as Mrs. Henderson had described them in her original witness statement from that Halloween night 12 years earlier, with the fabric edges showing no fraying or deterioration that would be expected from extended exposure to moisture and temperature fluctuations. Maria's elaborate witch costume was perhaps the most unsettling discovery of all, the black fabric still rich and deep, without any fading from sun exposure or leaching from rainwater. Her pointed hat sitting at precisely the same angle she had worn it while waving goodbye to Mrs. Henderson that final evening when they walked into the darkness and vanished from existence. The costume's intricate details, including small silver buttons and decorative trim that Maria had added to make her outfit more authentic, remained perfectly intact and showed no signs of tarnishing or corrosion, despite being discovered in a humid forest environment that should have affected metal components over such an extended period of time. But what truly disturbed every single person involved in this discovery, from the young Boy Scouts to seasoned investigators who had seen decades of unexplained phenomena and bizarre crime scenes, was the impossible scent that still clung to those costumes 12 full years after the Rocha family had disappeared without a trace, as if the very essence of that Halloween night had been somehow preserved along with the fabric and memories. Tommy Chen and the other scouts reported detecting Maria's distinctive lavender perfume, the exact same fragrance that had lingered in their abandoned house the night they vanished, and had been specifically mentioned in multiple witness statements from neighbors who knew her well and could identify her signature scent from across a room. The perfume wasn't just a faint trace or imagined memory, but a clear, unmistakable aroma that seemed to emanate from the witch costume, as if Maria had just applied it moments before, defying every principle of chemistry and evaporation that should have eliminated such delicate scent molecules within days of exposure to outdoor conditions. David's ghost costume somehow still carried the faint but unmistakable aroma of his aftershave, a distinctive woody scent with complex notes of cedar, sandalwood and bergamot that his co-workers at Morrison and Associates had specifically mentioned during our original investigation, when describing how they could always tell when David had arrived at the office each morning. The aftershave was a relatively expensive brand that David had used consistently for years, and its presence on the costume after 12 years of supposed outdoor exposure violated every known principle of scent retention and molecular stability. Forensic experts later confirmed that such aromatic compounds should have dissipated completely within weeks of exposure to rain, temperature fluctuations, and natural air circulation. Even more impossible and scientifically inexplicable, the children's costumes still emanated what could only be described as the unique scent of the Rocha house itself. That distinctive and comforting combination of Maria's homemade cooking, with its hints of garlic and oregano from her famous pasta sauce, David's strong coffee brewing every morning at exactly 6:30 a.m., and those vanilla-scented candles she burned religiously in the living room every single evening, while helping the twins with homework and reading bedtime stories. It was a scent combination so specific and complex that multiple investigators who had processed the original crime scene immediately recognized it and were visibly shaken by the impossibility of its preservation. The house scent was particularly disturbing because it represented not just individual fragrances, but the accumulated aromatic essence of a family's daily life, their routines, their cooking, their habits, their very existence compressed into fabric fibers that should have been stripped clean by 12 years of forest exposure. The discovery immediately rekindled the official investigation with renewed resources, advanced forensic techniques that hadn't been available in 1995, and a sense of urgency fueled by the inexplicable nature of the costume preservation. The FBI reopened their files and assigned a team of specialists in unusual phenomena, while the state police contributed their most experienced investigators and latest DNA analysis equipment. We brought in experts in textile preservation, environmental science, and even consulting specialists in paranormal investigation, who had worked with law enforcement agencies on cases involving unexplained physical evidence. However, the renewed investigation also raised infinitely more questions than it could possibly answer, creating new mysteries that seemed to multiply like reflections in opposing mirrors, each more disturbing than the last. How had those costumes remained in such impossible pristine condition after 12 years of exposure to harsh New England weather, including freezing temperatures that dropped below zero, summer heat that exceeded 90 degrees, torrential rains during hurricane season, and heavy snow that would have buried them for months at a time? Why were they arranged so deliberately and ceremonially in that specific location, positioned as if someone had created a shrine or memorial with careful attention to detail that suggested deep emotional significance? The arrangement wasn't random or accidental. Someone had taken considerable time to position each costume with respect and precision, smoothing fabric, adjusting angles, and creating a scene that felt more like a sacred memorial than an abandoned dumping ground. Most disturbing of all, if the Rocha family had been wearing those exact costumes when they disappeared on Halloween night 1995, what had actually happened to their physical bodies? This question haunted every investigator involved in the case because it suggested scenarios that challenged our understanding of reality itself. Had the family somehow removed their costumes before whatever happened to them occurred? If so, why were the costumes in the forest rather than in their house or car? Had someone else removed the costumes from their bodies after they disappeared? If so, who had access to them, and why preserve them so carefully for 12 years before placing them in the forest? Or, most disturbing of all possibilities, had something supernatural occurred that separated the essence of their Halloween night from their physical forms, preserving their costumes as eternal reminders of their final evening while their bodies disappeared into some unknown dimension? The entire forest surrounding the discovery site was systematically searched by teams of investigators using ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, metal detectors, and infrared imaging equipment that could detect underground disturbances or buried objects. The search expanded to cover over 40 square miles of dense woodland, involving hundreds of volunteers and professionals who combed through every ravine, cave, and hidden area where human remains might be concealed. However, despite the most extensive search in the county's history, no human remains were ever discovered. No DNA evidence beyond what should have been expected on clothing worn by the family. No personal belongings that might have been dropped during a struggle or escape attempt. No bones or teeth that might have been scattered by animals. Absolutely nothing but those 4 impossible costumes that defied every natural law and scientific explanation we could devise. Advanced forensic analysis of the costumes using techniques that hadn't existed in 1995 revealed findings that only deepened the mystery. Carbon dating of the fabric confirmed that the materials were consistent with mid-1990s manufacturing, and textile analysis matched samples from the original investigation, proving conclusively that these were indeed the same costumes the family had been wearing on the night they disappeared. However, tests for environmental degradation showed results that were scientifically impossible. The fabric showed no signs of UV damage, moisture absorption, temperature stress, or exposure to organic matter that should have been inevitable after 12 years in a forest environment. The costumes tested as if they had been stored in perfect museum conditions with climate control, UV protection, and chemical preservation treatments that weren't available to ordinary families in 1995. The case remains officially open to this day, classified as an active investigation, despite the lack of new leads or evidence beyond the costume discovery that raised more questions than it answered. The files now fill 6 filing cabinets in the county courthouse basement, containing thousands of pages of witness statements, forensic reports, scientific analyses, and theories from investigators, academics, and concerned citizens who have followed the case for decades. Sometimes late at night, when I'm reviewing cold case files in my office, surrounded by photographs and evidence boxes from dozens of unsolved mysteries, I still find myself returning to the Rocha case, wondering if somewhere out there in a parallel dimension or alternate reality, the Rocha family is still walking through an eternal Halloween night, forever searching for a way home, while their empty costumes wait patiently in that forest clearing as sentinels marking the boundary between our world and whatever impossible realm they entered on October 31st, 1995. What do you think really happened to the Rocha family that Halloween night in 1995? Was it something supernatural that defies all logical explanation and challenges our understanding of reality itself? Or is there a rational answer hidden somewhere in the evidence that we've all somehow missed, despite decades of investigation and analysis? Could there be a human explanation for the perfect preservation of those costumes? Or does their condition suggest forces beyond our current scientific understanding? Share your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more unsolved mysteries that will keep you awake at night, wondering what other impossible things might be hiding in the shadows of our everyday world, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves and challenge everything we think we know about the laws of nature and the boundaries between the possible and the impossible.